Hello, everyone, and welcome one more time to Ashram Talks. This is Atul Krishnadas, and I am honored to be your host in this evening. Today, we continue our journey through Karma Yoga. And in past episodes, we have been talking a little bit about the importance of being very mindful about the actions that we do every day, and that they can become an offering to God, and that in itself will bring us joy, and it will make us feel like our life is meaningful, even with small things. But sometimes life presents challenges, and it's very difficult to keep that mind frame. And for some of us, that makes it a little bit more difficult and sometimes frustrating. So today we're going to explore a little bit about how to tackle those situations and how easy it can become to live karma yoga in the day to day to day. And for that, today we're going to be with the wonderful Simon Haas. Hello, Simon. How are you doing?
Atul Krishnadas, it's great to be here with you today.
Thank you so much for having us and being here with us. It's always a joy hearing you.
So today we have moved to verse 61 of chapter 2. And what teachings will we be covering today? We'll look especially at how to engage our heart in our yoga practice. So that's an element that Krishna introduces here. So questions that will be or topics we'll be covering today are: how can I engage my heart, not just my head or intellect, in my daily practice? Is my heart softening or hardening as I move through life? Am I acting from love or from fear and competition? What's the difference between what I'll call small love and sacred love? And where in my life am I still offering only small love? And what would it mean for me to make my whole life an offering of devotion? So, as we'll see here in this verse, Krishna begins to introduce bhakti yoga. So we'll start with a traditional Mangalacharanam, an auspicious invocation, as we are accustomed to do. Om Ajnanatimirandhasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. He Shri Guru Jnana Bando Swananda Data Karunaika Sindho Vrindavanasi Nahitavatara Prasidha Radha Pranaya Prachara. Thank you very much for joining us today. I want to thank Colleen. I, yeah, I see that you join us for the live sessions almost every single time, and so I want to offer my respects to you and my affection. So now, Krishna has earlier, when Arjuna's mind was overcome by fear, lamentation, and confusion, Krishna stressed the importance of disciplining the mind and senses. Yoga requires control of the restless mind, which can be a challenge, especially in the dark night of the soul. As Arjuna will confess, the mind is unsteady and impetuous, powerful and obdurate. I think controlling the mind is as difficult as controlling the wind, Arjuna says. And Krishna will acknowledge that controlling the mind is difficult, but it's possible with practice. More potent than the mind, however, is the heart. And by engaging our heart in our yoga practice, Krishna explains, we can overcome the greatest obstacles on the yoga path. So this is the first indication here of bhakti yoga. So we turn now to verse 61 of chapter 2. Tani sarvani samyamya yukta asita matparaha vashehi yasrindriyani tasya pragya pratishtita. One who restrains his senses and fixes his consciousness upon me is known as a person of steady intelligence. So Krishna here, he's continuing his description of the Stita Pragya, a person who has steady wisdom. Pragya means wisdom or discernment, and here he uses the word pratishtita, which is similar. It means firmly established or well founded, steady. So this is someone whose wisdom is immovable. It doesn't depend, it doesn't disappear in challenging situations. So Krishna explains here that such a person subdues their senses, tani sarvani samyamya, and remains self-disciplined, yukta asita, fixing the mind on the supreme, matparaha. For one whose senses are truly subdued, only for such a person wisdom becomes firmly grounded. Tasya pragya pratishtita. So this raises a question. Why is Krishna focusing so much on control of the mind and the senses? um, One way to really bring this out and understand the importance of this teaching is by observing that this is actually a knowledge for kings and queens. It's a knowledge for everyone, but designed especially, you could say, for kings and queens. So we'll come to a verse in the 9th chapter, Raja Vidya Raja Guyam. That's often translated as this knowledge is the king of knowledge and the most secret knowledge. But commentators like Sri Ramanuja have explained that it also means a knowledge for kings, a secret held by and protected by kings. And you see in many of the sacred texts of India, the Mahabharata, the Puranas, you have rishis or sages that are imparting these teachings to rulers, to kings and queens. Think of a leader with an uncontrolled mind and senses, right? uh, that person can easily take an entire nation to war because of ego or greed. They will overreact out of fear. They're open to flattery and corruption. So we too are like kings and queens. We have a kingdom, which is our perceptual world, our life. And kingdoms are of different sizes. Some of us may run businesses, or we may be involved in projects that bring together an entire community. So, how the extent to which we have control over the restless mind and senses is the extent to which our kingdom will either prosper or falter. So remember, Krishna has already explained in previous verses that we are not the mind and senses. Our true identity is beyond the storyline the stories that we create and live from. So to illustrate that, I want to share a story. um, this is a traditional story from India that's passed down from generation to generation. So there was once a blind man, and traditionally in India, if you were not able to work for any reason, maybe because of in this case because this person was blind, you could go from door to door, from house to house, and you could call out for help and beg in that way, and families, households would come out of their home and give you whatever they're able to give you. So I live in Costa Rica, and economic situation is difficult in many countries, increasingly so. So we sometimes have, or fairly regularly actually, um, people who are in very difficult personal circumstances come by and and they'll ring or call out and ask for some help. We have a rule in our home that we never leave them empty-handed. Always try to give them something at least. to try and help them out. So this blind man was going from on the main road, was going from house to house. And he came across what looked like a large mansion. And he thought, this is a very big building. Um, these people are well off. If I ask for help, they'll be able to give me whatever I need. So at the gate, he began calling out. And he called out, and there was no answer. So he thought to himself, well, sometimes, you have like a wall, a boundary wall that is like the first gate to a big home, and you have to pass through that and walk up the road, and then you find the actual house itself. So maybe it's a large building like that. So he went into the gate and began walking, and he didn't come across anything. And he was calling out, and it was silent. He could only hear like a slight echo of his call. So he thought, okay, there's no one here. This is some kind of abandoned place. I'll go back to the main road and continue on my way. So he thought, well, how am I going to get back to that gate? And he thought, oh, that won't be difficult. I'll walk and I'll stretch out my hand and I'll walk until I reach a wall. And then I'll follow the wall along until I reach the opening in the wall from which I used to come into this place. So he stretched out his hand, and soon enough he came across a stone wall. And he began walking, touching the wall. And he was walking and walking. And for 20 minutes, he was still walking, touching this wall. He couldn't find that opening which had allowed him to enter into that place. By this stage, the sun had risen, and it was approaching 11 o'clock, and then eventually 11:30, 12 o'clock, so midday. The heat of the sun was scorching the top of his head. He felt perspiration trickling down his brow, and he kept walking, and more perspiration. And at one point, he felt an itching sensation on his back and the nape of his neck, and he began to scratch it as he was walking. So he took his hand away, was scratching, and then put his hand back on the wall and continued walking. Now, what had happened is that this blind man had entered into a large circular arena with only one entrance and one exit, which is how he had entered into that place. And he had followed the wall all the way around in a large circle. And just as he was right by the exit to scratch himself, he had taken his hand off the wall. And as he continued walking, he had scratched himself and put it back onto the wall, and he had missed the exit. And so he needed to go and take that large circle once again. So this traditional story illustrates our human predicament. So I think that those watching this particular episode, you'll know that in India there is the belief in reincarnation. This is not our first time in this world, and it will not be our last birth either. We've lived and died so many times, and in different lives, we've had different circumstances. Sometimes we've been kings and queens. Sometimes we've been warriors. Sometimes we've been artisans. Sometimes beggars. Sometimes someone who's in great difficulty, and also not necessarily humans. There are 8,400,000 species of life, and we have made our way through all of those countless times. So in this story, that going through all the different species of life before having this opportunity as a human is that large arena, that large circle that this blind man makes his way around. And the human life is particularly important because it's considered to be the only life that in which we can practice the teachings of yoga and leave that cycle of birth and death, transcend it, which is what the teachings of the Gita are helping us do. And so, like the blind person, it's very easy to spend this human life being distracted. So the various things, the various habits that distract us are like an itchy sensation. We know from habits that are, or addictions. Let's speak about it, frame it in terms of addictions. Addictions are like they're like almost in many ways like a physical urge to itch. If you have like a mosquito bite or something that's itching very much, you'll scratch it and blood may even come out, but you can't stop yourself from just scratching it, even when you know that it's a harmful thing to do. And so in this human life, there are many distractions, and it's very easy to fall into patterns of harmful habits, addictions, and spend an entire life forgetting who we truly are, what this human life is for, how valuable it is, and not realizing our full potential. So, in order to avoid that, Krishna gives 18 systems of yoga in the Bhagavad Gita. And we've been looking at some of those. The first one was Vishad Yoga, the yoga of the dark night, the yoga of crisis. We've moved to Karma Yoga, the yoga of action. Krishna spoke about Buddhi Yoga, the yoga of the intellect. And he's in explaining Buddhi Yoga, he's also explaining Bhakti Yoga, the yoga of sacred love, the yoga of devotion. So in verse 61, also Krishna uses the phrase Matparaha, dedicated to me, to describe the way in which someone should perform this Buddhi Yoga. So the reference to Krishna here, the reference to himself, is something that is new. And it's an introduction to bhakti, devotion to Krishna. And in the ancient mystical bhakti tradition, the yogi or yogini uses love and devotion to reawaken her natural connection to the soul of the universe. And that practice is called bhakti yoga, the yoga of offering love. So I want to take this opportunity to touch on bhakti yoga, provide an early introduction to bhakti yoga because it's so central to the Bhagavad Gita. Ultimately, all forms of yoga are meant to help us cultivate love and compassion. If our yoga is taking us not closer to, but further away from love and compassion, then it has lost its way. If you can say if our practice is hardening our heart, it's not yoga. On the path of bhakti, the yogi or yogini makes everything in her life an expression of loving service to Krishna, the soul of the universe. It's a beautiful teaching that everything can be an offering of love, a sacred act, and that enables us to write the most beautiful story we're capable of. So the first step to engaging our heart in our yoga practice, which is something I want to focus on in this episode, we'll speak more on bhakti yoga in the next episode with me, which is on November 24th, Monday, November 24th. That will be like a second part to this one. So the first step is engaging our heart in our yoga practice. The first step is to be more conscious of its state. So is my heart becoming softer or harder? Is my heart opening or expanding, or is it shrinking or shutting down? Am I acting from a place of love and kindness or a place of competition and fear? For many, the heart can be more like a dead organ, a little like the appendix. We're not quite sure what it's for. We might think it doesn't serve us so well. We often prefer to use our heads, our intellect. And over the course of our life, we invest enormously into improving the mind. Years of education, reading, discussion, intellectual discussion, stimulating debates. But how much time and energy do we put into improving the capacity of our heart? We have no schools of the heart in our society. So, faced with life's tribulations and challenges, our heart can become harder or softer. And the art of allowing life to make our heart soft is called yoga. Um, in fact, whenever we practice any form of yoga, even the yoga postures, we can remember that the aim of our practice is to open our heart, to increase our capacity to love. This then reframes everything that we do in yoga. So I want to introduce a distinction between two types, what we might refer to as two types of love. And we'll look at this further on November 24th. So if you walk into, say, a coffee shop, right, you'll see an incredibly sophisticated vocabulary for coffee. Americano, latte, uh, macchiato, frappuccino. There's so many different terms that are used for different types of coffee. The list seems endless. But oddly, we only have one or two words for love, isn't it? Yeah. Love, affection, there's just one or two words. So the vocabulary that we have in any society, it reflects what's important in that society. So love is a beautiful word, but at the same time, that little delicate word has lost its sacred meaning. It can be used to mean any number of things, from what pleases our palate to sexual passion to deep friendship to love for all beings, and more. So that little word has to do a huge amount of work. Even the ancient Greeks had 6 different words for different types of love. And in the heart-based bhakti tradition of India, I've counted over 20 different words for different types of love, from the love that is mixed with selfishness and self-interest to divine love. The sacred texts of India do something very interesting. They speak about the purity of love. And that implies something important. It implies that what passes as love in everyday life can be contaminated by ego, by the desire to manipulate or control, by narcissism, jealousy, false perception, selfish intent. So when we say, I love you, we're usually more focused on the I than on the quality of love that we're offering. So we can call that type of love that is an expression of the illusory ego, we can call that small love. So in previous episodes, early episodes, we spoke about the small imagined story that we live out in the world. And when we express a love that emerges from that small imagined story, that love is fickle and limited. And if someone supports our story, they have our love and attention. But if someone undermines or subverts our story, we feel threatened and we withhold our love. So, put simply, small love can be highly conditional. And as a result, it's also temporary. So, two people, they view themselves, or one may view oneself as a package of attributes, a package of qualities. And in this world, we look for someone who has a package of qualities that we think is of equal or higher value to the one that we assign ourselves. And we try to create a relationship. So that's the nature of generally of love in this world. It's highly conditional, and as a result, it's temporary. That's exactly why you have two people expressing their declaring their undying love for each other one day, and then some months, some years, or even months later, declaring their undying hatred for each other in the divorce courts. It's because it's small love. Small love is also based on false perception. So we don't truly see the other person that we claim to love at the level of the soul. We see only a secondary character in our own small story. So we perceive others in relation to our own illusory ego and its needs. And so it's a love that's based on illusion. And it's also a love that's accidental, right? We speak about falling in love. It's almost like an accident. You trip over into it, and you may fall out of it as well. And then small love is also typically limited to just a small circle of friends and relatives. Some people extend their love to their community or their country, but even in doing that, it's in contradistinction to some other community or some other country that they don't extend that same care towards. So those are the 4 or 5 uh, qualities, characteristics of small love. It's highly conditional, it's temporary, it's based on false perception, and it's limited to a small circle of friends and relatives. So Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita will share a different type of love. We can call it sacred love. In Sanskrit, it's bhakti or prema. And this is a love that has the opposite characteristics. It's unconditional. It's not temporary, uh, but it's ever it's not broken. It's everlasting, and it's not based on false perception. Rather, it's based on the deepest wisdom, and it's not limited to a small circle of friends and relatives, but it extends to all souls. And the way that one develops sacred love, as Krishna teaches it in the Bhagavad Gita, is to direct it to the soul of the soul of the universe, Sri Krishna. Um, so uh, this kind of love, it operates beyond the stories that we enact and beyond the play of form in this world. It embraces, by directing it to the sacred center, it then extends to all beings without um, without looking at, without calculation. All beings become, no being is a stranger anymore. Everyone is family when that love is directed to the sacred center. So Krishna explains later in chapter 6, he defines the highest yogi or the highest yogini. Let me see if I can remember. He says, Atma paum yena sarvatra samam pashyati arjuna sukamba yadivadukam sayog yogi paramo mataha. Parama yogi, the highest yogi is who? The highest yogi or yogini is one who sees everyone's happiness and suffering as if it were her own. So how do we widen our circle in that way? And Krishna's answer is surprising. And it represents one of his most confidential and esoteric teachings. So we often hear that we can't truly love others until we learn to love ourselves, right? That's something that we often hear. How can we give something to others if we don't yet possess it ourselves? So Krishna takes that a step further. He advises Arjuna to direct his love inward, but as far inward as he can possibly can, to the sacred source of his being, the soul of the soul. So rather than directing our love first to our body, which is just a vehicle, or to our mind, we can direct our love to Krishna, the soul of the universe and the source of consciousness, seated in the temple of our very being. And by targeting our love to the sacred center, our love alchemically transforms from small love into sacred love. This is the essence of Bhakti Yoga. And this is the meaning of Matparaha in returning to the verse, Matparaha, with consciousness fixed on me, fixed on the Supreme. In this particular verse of the Gita, verse 61 of chapter 2. We'll stop here. In the next episode, so the one on November 24th, we'll enter more deeply into this teaching of Bhakti Yoga. The commentators, so we, as within the Bhakti tradition, we're uh, very blessed to have many commentators on the Bhagavad teachings of the Bhagavad Gita, spanning hundreds of years, and their deep insights into these systems of yoga. They've recorded them in originally manuscripts copied by hand from one generation to another. So we will enter more deeply into this topic in the next episode, and um, we've been discussing karma yoga, as Atul Krishna Prabhu has mentioned, and then also buddhi yoga, the yoga of the intellect. And they comment at this point, especially here, that here buddhi yoga is synonymous with bhakti yoga, the yoga of devotion. Thank you very much. We'll stop here. Looking forward to connecting with you in the next episode.
Thank you so much for those words of wisdom. And I think you will leave us, reflecting, meditating about the kind of relationships that we want to nurture, that we currently have, and how we can redirect our efforts to make more effortless, um, well, our offerings to Krishna every single day. I do not see any additional questions, but as always, if you want to go deeper, you can always comment, and you're more than welcome to join us live every Monday at 7:30 p.m. and every Thursday at 8 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Thank you, everybody who were able to join. I hope you have a wonderful day.
Thank you, Atulji.